what books would you cherish to keep with you? 3.
3 books. This is sort of the desert island question. I don't know.
Your living room.
I'm such a happy, avid reader that of course 3 would be both too many and not enough. I had the privilege of knowing Borges quite well, and once when I was in Buenos Aires and we were in a public discussion, a very playful thing that we didn't prepare at all. We were just laughing in front of a large audience and asking each other childish questions, the childish questions that lovers of literature like to ask. And he said, what book would you like to take if you had only one book? And, well, we couldn't, and I asked him, he asked me, and then we couldn't decide whether it was Shakespeare or a complete dictionary. I think if you ask me what books have really mattered, I think in recent years for me, oh gosh, there are so many. I think that you mentioned Garcia Marquez. Garcia Marquez is certainly a writer who has changed and improved one's idea of what fiction can do. It's interesting how literary influence works. I'm told, I don't know whether it's true, that Garcia Marquez was very influenced by Faulkner, and that he feels, or it's been said of him at any rate, that he could not have done what he did without the example of Faulkner. But I think he's better than Faulkner. And in fact, I've always had a hard time reading Faulkner, and I have no difficulty at all reading Garcia Marquez. So I think sometimes the way these influences circulate, I like also something exotic. I like something mysterious. Maybe Faulkner's too close. You know, maybe someone like Garcia Marquez or Juan Rulfo is more interesting to me because I don't completely understand it, because it has a certain kind of mystery or energy. Probably, I think for most of us, certain writers in German and in Russian have been the most important, and yet we don't read them, of course, in German or Russian. At least I don't. We read them in translation. I certainly feel that literature is an international affair. And although you write out of your own time and your own place, your geography is destiny. We're all born somewhere, and we're all hinged to the time in which we live. Nevertheless, literature and making literature seems to me also a kind of space travel, in which a writer who comes from Russia or Colombia or Mexico or Japan could be as important, or more, actually more important to me than an American writer. So it's very, very international. And a writer from the past might be more real to me than, and more present, seem more contemporary even than most of my contemporaries. I think it's very important not to be caught up by fashion or what people think are the important reputations or the important themes, because the literature that will last is probably quite eccentric. It's probably even marginal. It probably has some secret oddness that will keep it alive, not something that can't be completely assimilated or used up in its own time.
Susan, before you were telling me that when you wrote The Volcano Lover, you were trying to write about love and romance. I would like to know if Emma and the Admiral Nelson live up to the reputation of a romantic lovers.
Well, Sylvia, let me just tell you, it's not that I wanted to write about it, it's that or I was trying. I mean, it's wonderful to write about feeling, but all sorts of strong feelings. What you want to do, I think, is to defeat the limiting stereotypes. For instance, at the moment that Emma Hamilton and Lord Nelson became lovers, neither of them were very good-looking. They were no longer young. Emma was very fat. She was an alcoholic, and she had put on a great deal of weight. When she was in her 20s, she was considered the most beautiful woman of her time. I mean, she was a legendary beauty, but by the time she was in her mid-30s, she was quite transformed. And Nelson himself, who was in his early 40s, had been very seriously injured in battle. He had lost an eye, he had lost an arm, he had lost most of his teeth. One of the things that interested me is our feelings about people who don't live up to a romantic cliche of appearance. When these people were represented in films, because of course there have been films about Nelson and Emma and so on. Of course, they're always played by wonderfully good-looking actors. We have a kind of snobbery about looks, that we think that romantic passion is something appropriate if you look a certain way. I think it's important to think about those stereotypes, particularly because they affect women much more than men, because women are judged much more by their appearance than men are. So this is part of what I was saying before, of a sort of feminist theme in the book. But to me, passion is passion, and it's felt when it's felt.
It goes beyond physics or anything exterior.
Well, it goes beyond cliches about the exterior, but it is about the exterior. I mean, we are drawn to each other by the exterior and by the appearance. It's just that I think the heart is more imaginative than one gives it credit for, that's all. But it's not that I think Oscar Wilde was right, that the surface is very important. I don't say the surface appearance isn't important. I just say one is, in fact, has much more imagination about these things. Ordinary people, we all do. It's only that our feelings aren't correctly represented in literature for the most part, or we are the victims of the beauty industry, of certain kinds of consumerist ideas, which are not so new. They've been around for a long time. And once again, these ideas are much more punishing for women than they are for men.
How did you approach the volcano? Tell us about the visit in London to buy prints of your favorite architectural prints, and then you found the volcano, colorful prints.
Most works of fiction have some inspiration in real life. That doesn't mean that everything is autobiographical, but still there is a story. Perhaps it's a story you heard at a dinner party. Perhaps it's a story you overheard on a bus. Perhaps it's something you read in a newspaper. But there's always a seed, something that strikes your imagination. So I knew vaguely about these people in the 18th century. I saw these images in a print shop that came from a book that Sir William Hamilton had done on volcanoes. And I thought, well, I always think perhaps there's a story here, but I really meant a short story. And even when I began The Volcano Lover, I thought it was going to be a short novel. I think you must, I won't say must, I will just speak for myself. I think I have to approach the writing of a book on my knees. I don't start by thinking I'm going to write a great book. I think perhaps I'll do something which is not so bad, and it will be very small. And then as I come into the subject and the doors open and more doors open and more doors open, then I see what it can be. About a third of the way through writing this book, I thought, oh, it's really good. And then about halfway through, I thought, oh, I'm writing the best book I ever wrote. And when I finished it, I thought, oh, this is my first book. But this, I found out as I was doing it. I could never, never, never have thought this at the beginning. And of course, now that I've written it, and I really like it, and I do think it's a wonderful book, and I've never said this of any book of mine before. I think it's a book that will last. It's a breakthrough for me. It's like the beginning of my life as a writer. Almost everything I feel leads up to this book. Now I've started another novel, and I'm right down at the bottom again. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not sure it's any good. I think maybe it's just a very small book.
What do you need when you write? Do you need music? Do you need coffee? Do you need cigarettes? What do you need?
Well, of course I need cigarettes. I'm a much suffering smoker who isn't smoking anymore because, of course, it's very stupid to smoke. So finally, I gave it up, and I miss it terribly. But of course, I would like to live a long time to write a few books I really like. Since I'm not young, I think. I used to be described as very precocious, but now I think, in fact, I'm a late developer. So in order to keep on for a few more decades, I did give up smoking, and I miss it horribly. I don't drink, except just, at dinner with other people, so-called socially, and not even very much that. I'm too interested in being awake. I don't like the soporific thing that happens with drinking, that it makes you sleepy. I love coffee. I find I do play music sometimes when I write, but I realize that I'm not listening. I think the most important thing is just to have the time to go inside oneself into a deeper place.
Do you struggle with a white page like any other writer?
Oh, I do have a struggle because I hate to fail. So I hesitate to put this. I have this sentence in my head, and I put it down, and if I don't like it, I feel ashamed. Now, I know I'm alone, of course, and I can tear it up and throw it in the wastebasket, and no one is going to know. But I would like to like what I write. So there is a little struggle to put it down in case when I put it down, I don't like it, and there's a struggle. But if you keep at it, you get somewhere. I think there are many talented people of all kinds, and many people with a talent for writing. Perhaps what makes the difference between a writer who has a big body of work and someone who doesn't, or even someone who doesn't really get going at all, is much more a question of character and tenacity than it is talent. It's to devote your life to literature really is quite self-sacrificing. It does demand a certain kind of heroism. It demands being able to be alone a lot of the time, when really you would like to go out and play with everyone else.
You have shed enormous light on the modern imagination. What is the legacy of modern art?
When I used to write essays, what would be the inspiration for an essay very often would be the feeling that something was a paradox, that there was a contradiction, that it seemed to be this, but it was really that. It was always trying to make everything more complicated. When I wrote these essays on photography, for instance, I thought, well, photography is such a complicated thing. It's so complicated to get your idea of the world, mainly now through photographic images, and how different we are. For instance, we can know what we looked like as children. We can sit and look at ourselves as children or our parents as children. I mean, of course there were paintings in the past, but then you only had one or two paintings. You can have thousands of photographs of yourself at all ages. Think of how we know ourselves and what it means to know ourselves and have this kind of record of the past, of aging, of mortality that we have through the photographic image. That's the kind of thing that I start with an essay, and then something that leads to something else and something else and something else. If you ask me about modern art in general, I think that we've reached a point where the term is really quite bankrupt. I think we're not comfortable really speaking about modern art. We want to speak about, at least I do, about individuals and not about a project. The project of modern art, if there is a project, has been largely destructive. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And yet the achievements of individual artists has been very great. But I think when modern art came on the scene, the art that called itself modern, or the thought that called itself modern, it was so contentious, it was so much an art and a way of thinking that said, down with the past, down with what people used to think, we have another way, we have a new way. It praised the new, it disparaged the old. Now that we've lived with all these modern projects for many generations, now that we're coming to the end of the century, I think we're more aware of the destructiveness of these new ways than we are of their accomplishments. Perhaps the challenge was too disrespectful of the past. So the way out of it is not, I think, to think, is the modern good or bad, because that's like saying, is the weather good or bad? It is what it is. But to try to focus on things which are more specific and which show us complexity rather than simplification. I think we have to have more complicated view of everything.
Susan, is the new any longer?
Well, the people always seem to be inventing some new way of being destructive. So the human capacity for destructiveness is very great. That human beings seem very resourceful about destructiveness. I mean, look at all the forms of violence that we thought that are flourishing now, that we hoped were on the wane. For instance, tribal and nationalistic and racial violence, which we thought, at least in certain parts of the world, were things of the past, but now turn out to be just as violent as ever. There is something new, and it's very destructive.
How did you come up to that magnificent women's chorus at the end of the novel?
Well, thank you, Silvia, for asking this question, because this, to me, really was the point, to use the vulgar expression, this was the payoff. I knew when I started the book, I not only had the title, but I had the plan of the book. And I knew that most of it would be told in the form of this third-person narration, of telling the story, but also coming into the present and commenting and going back into the story and so on. But still telling a very vivid, complex story, a big fresco, lots of characters, as an old-fashioned, almost 19th century narrator. And then at a certain point, the story would end, and you would hear these voices, and all women. There is actually a bridge monologue, which is the Cavaliere, the main male character, on his deathbed in a kind of delirium. And then these women, 4 of the principal women in the novel, they come forward like, as an opera, like an aria. They come center stage, front, face the audience. They speak from beyond the grave, so that they can describe how they died. And they each tell their version of the story. And they are 4 women, and they represent very much women's points of view, because they are completely different from each other. Different, not only that there are different characters. I mean, there is Hamilton's first wife, there is the mother of his second wife, Emma. Then there is Emma, his famous second wife, who became the lover of Lord Nelson. And then finally there is a revolutionary, a poet, the one woman who was prominent among the leaders of the very short-lived, tragic Neapolitan Revolution of 1799, who was executed, who was hanged. by them, by the Hamiltons and Nelson. And she speaks at the end. I wanted to end the book with the voice of a victim. I think it's important to hear always the side of the people who were defeated when you are writing a novel that has a historical fresco. And when I started the book, I knew that I was going to end with these 4 monologues, and they were going to be the climax of the book. And I thought that's when I really take the reader on a big trip. I mean, it's like the rocket takes off. And I wanted so much to write them early on because I thought I knew what they were going to be. But I restrained myself. I actually wrote the book consecutively. I didn't race ahead. And I knew when I got to that, it would be wonderful. It'd be wonderful for me to write them. And I was very, very moved. I became each of those 4 women. And they each describe how they died. And Eleonora de Fonseca Pimentel describes, she was hanged in a public square. And she describes how she was hanged. And I wrote that here, actually. I wrote that in this room, sitting on this couch. I write by hand. And I was trembling. I was terrified as I wrote it. I felt it was happening to me. I was so overwhelmed emotionally for each of them, but also I identified with all 4 of them. I identified with the first wife, with the mother, with this horrible old mother who's kind of like a mère maquerelle. She's like an old pimp, and yet she loves her daughter so much. And then with Emma, and then finally with this poet and revolutionary. That was really the great experience. But a novel, is a long journey. If you could imagine, it's perhaps too simple, but I think it's true. The difference between a story and a novel is when the reader reads a story, at the end of the story, you do remember the beginning. And when you come to the end of a novel, of a really good novel, you don't remember the beginning. You've gone so far that the beginning is really lost. It's a real journey. It's a real trip. I think that's the great thing with a novel.
Oh, we thank you for that book, Susan. So this last novel is your second son. But Susan, you have a first son, David Reeve, and he is also a writer. Does that make the relationship between you two much more closer?
Well, of course, I'm very proud of my son, who is the love of my life. But I would have been very happy if he had been an architect or a doctor or an actor or any one of a number of other things that I had fantasies about his being. I was actually a bit surprised that he decided to be a writer. He hasn't yet written fiction. He's a wonderful observer of contemporary history and culture, and he's and America. He's written two books about Cubans in Miami.
In Los Angeles.
Yes, a new book. It's called The Exile, about Cubans in Miami, and a book about Los Angeles, about Hispanic and Asian immigrants in Los Angeles. He is a moralist. He writes about social and historical problems with a very passionate moral point of view. He's a great critic of contemporary society, I think. I'm very, very proud of him, and I've learned a lot from him. So, but I have to say that I would love him whatever he did.
Thank you again for the interview and for the book, The Volcano Lover.
Thank you, Silvia.
En Nueva York, Silvia Lemus.